we'll just give it a few moments before we begin our talk today as everyone joins us in the room.
Hello, everyone.
Anything? See. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to get started now, because I think if given the opportunity, Hayden and I could talk about this for 6, 8, 10 hours, but we only have an hour here today. So we're going to try to cover a lot. So bear with us, and we'll kind of try to give you a nice overview of the NFT market, and any questions you have at the end, feel free, or during the presentation, feel free to type them into the chat box, and we'll answer all of your questions at the end. So again, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us during your lunch hour. I'm thrilled to be joined by Hayden Kopser, president and co-founder of North Improvement, a boutique risk advisory and insurance brokerage firm. Hayden and we've actually truly spent the last several weeks talking about NFTs, what they are, and how they become the most speculative segment of the art market at the moment. Following the groundbreaking $69 million sale of Beeple's Everyday, the first 5,000 days, there has been laser-focused attention on the market for NFTs as the paradigm of new art, new buyers, and a new way of transacting, even really a new idea of art itself. This area is so cutting edge that many people don't know what it is. As a fellow art lover, but more importantly, an app developer, Hayden will help me dispel the myth and provide great insight into this digital asset. Before I turn it over to Hayden, I have a couple housekeeping items. All participants will be on mute during the talk. Please type in any questions that you have into the chat box, and we will answer them at the end. I will also be sharing our contact information so you can follow up with us directly after the talk with any additional questions. A recording of this presentation will also be made available upon request. And now let me turn it over to Hayden.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Alana. Really excited to be on here. And yes, we will try to keep it within the hour. That will take a lot of control, because even this morning we learned there's new information coming out about the Beeple sale, for example, in the aftermath of that. I'm sure that will continue to be the case for some time, but I thought it would be best for us to begin not by jumping into NFTs and some of the nuances there, but rather beginning by talking about how did we get here? What are some of these concepts like blockchain and digital transmission of data that have brought rise to things like NFTs and given them utility. And the example I always like to give people is taking an image, taking a picture on your phone, as we call it. If I go on vacation, for example, and I take a picture of a beautiful mountain and I send it to a friend and say, hey, check out this place I visited. And they say, hey, I got your picture, I have your picture. We use that expression in the common parlance, and for all intents and purposes, they have that picture. But they don't have ownership of the original. They simply have a copy of that image that I created on my phone that I've sent to them. So there's no ownership there. And for that scenario, that's not a problem, because they don't need to own that picture. They just want to see it. But what if I, for example, were a wildlife photographer, and I go to Africa and I get all these beautiful images of elephants and all sorts of creatures, and then I contact National Geographic and I say, hey guys, look at all these pictures I took. Would you like to use them in your publication? Historically, and probably still in many cases, they would say, yes, now we've got to sign all these contracts. We've got to decide if you're going to maintain ownership or if we're going to be the owners, what commercial use we have to them, what we have to pay you for the rights, so on and so forth. With things like smart contracts and blockchain, people who are creators now have the ability to actually transmit ownership of digital creations of theirs. And there's basically the idea of an NFT is it's an automatic smart contract. So an NFT on its own has nothing to do with art. It's basically an online token that is unique. And in theory, there's not utility to an NFT on its own, but let's say you attach it to a piece of art, or you attach it to a picture that you've taken, or a PDF, or anything you create, then that NFT now gives you the ability to transmit proof of ownership via a blockchain, which is actually a very secure way to change ownership rights. And the NFT acts as an automatic smart contract. And we'll get into some of the pros, some of the benefits of NFTs, and how that smart contract can be used beyond art probably, but we'll talk about it in an art context. But NFTs on their own, what does it even stand for? It stands for non-fungible token, which is, fungible is always a funny word, but it's useful here because if you want an NFT to be unique and to be a secure token representing an item, you don't want it to be able to be broken in parts, because that'd be like splitting the title of an artwork into pieces and sending it to different people. So you don't want that to happen. You don't want it to be exchanged for another NFT, because that's going to create issues, and their values may not be similar. So it basically acts as this firm foundation with which you can back your art. And we'll get into some of the use cases, because you could use it for digital art. You could use it for physical art. You could take a picture of a painting, upload it, connect it to an NFT, and basically say, unless you own this NFT, even if you try and buy this painting, you aren't the full owner, because you don't have a picture of it. Perhaps you don't have documentation of the title in that NFT. So there's a nice secure aspect to it. But hopefully that gives you an idea of why did it even exist, and what were we doing before we had this digital means to actually change ownership of a digital item, be it art, be it an image, or whatever else. And the history was, we didn't really have a way, without all these convoluted legal methods of transmitted copies, and then hoping that the originals were deleted and not used for commercial purposes. So hopefully that gives an idea and helps us intro into the actual behind the scenes art and aspect of NFTs and where that's going. So I'll turn it back to you there, Alana.
Mm-hmm. So Hayden and I did something fun. We kind of made our own NFT for this presentation. What I did was I actually sent my firm's logo, which was designed by a New Jersey artist, Wayne Roth, to Hayden, and asked him to make an NFT to give you kind of insight into what some of these different platforms are and what it looks like. So I'm going to share my screen so you can see the NFT live. Let's see. Hayden, is it up there?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay. So I'll let you kind of give an overview of the website here, and kind of go through some of the components that we're seeing on this page for the NFT.
Absolutely, yeah. So the website, you can see in the URL, is Mintable. So when I wanted to create an NFT to really get a better understanding of this in an actual context last month, I was starting to look at all these platforms, and they seem to be popping up on a weekly, monthly, maybe even daily basis. All these new means to access the Ethereum blockchain and create NFTs and sell art. Mintable, I found it's Mark Cuban invested in it, so I felt pretty comfortable that it's probably not being used for terror funding or anything crazy that some of these online crypto platforms can unfortunately be used for. And Mintable is interesting. It has a curated aspect to it, and we'll get in later to curated versus just general open source NFT platforms, but it's got a curated homepage. You can see some of the top art that's being auctioned or sold. You have the option to sell or auction pieces. And then it also gives you the ability, essentially for free, to create your own NFTs and sell them, or at least put them up for sale. And that's what we did here. We thought it'd be great to give you an example. So you see here, so here's an image. In this case, we happen to just create a logo, or we happen to create an NFT where the logo is what's behind the NFT. Like you'd get a JPEG copy of it if you were to purchase this, which is not too dissimilar to how some artwork is being sold as NFTs. So the logo, in this case, the image there happens to also be the logo. We could have the logo as the profile picture for this piece and then sell something totally different within it. So in this case, it just happens to be the same thing. So you're actually buying a copy of that. Now you see here, so it says top seller. I created an account. I haven't sold anything. I guess they just default to that, which is interesting because who else is being labeled a top seller who's possibly not using this for good purposes. You have the token ID below that. So that is actually a unique identifier of this token, of this NFT, which helps secure it. So you could write down that number, what token number it is on the blockchain. So it's beneficial for that purpose. Edition is one of one. I guess you could sell multiple copies of things. I'm sure digital artists, just like physical artists, will have multiple prints, multiple digital copies they'd sell. Next below that, so see starting bid. So I wanted to put this up for a small amount just to see how low I could go. But due to something called gas fees, which is basically an additional cost of accessing a blockchain, and it has to do with the cost between crypto miners and people who are creating NFTs and platforms that are selling NFTs. It's basically the cost. It's almost like buying and selling gasoline. It costs more when it costs more to drill. When gas prices go down, it costs too much to drill. So and then the prices of gas go down. It's not too dissimilar. It's supposed to be conceptually like that. So it's very supply and demand based. And so I want you to look now, if you've got a pen and paper, write down the number you see. So it's 305.61. You're seeing that in US dollars. If you were to buy this work, you would put US dollar, that dollar amount, into Ether, ETC, the Ethereum cryptocurrency, and you'd buy it that way. So you'd actually be buying it with the coin rather than the US dollar. But we put the dollar amount because, unless you're very crypto oriented, you're not going to know what number of Ether means what. So you see time left, you can set a bid for however, you can set an auction to last as long as you want, if you even want to auction it. So then if you go below slightly, and the reason I want you to write that down is you'll see by the end of our talk, we can go back to this and the price is almost certainly going to change once we refresh the page. So you can see how volatile this stuff can be. So you see copyright transferred. In this case, no, it's BAM's logo. They're not going to transfer copyright, but you'll see in the description, we're allowing you to, in theory, if you were to buy this, to use it for commercial purposes with prior approval granted by the company. So you see downloadable file, yes. Resellable, yes. Now, one of the cool things about NFTs and most of these platforms is they give the seller either automatic or optional income from secondary sales. So you can set that amount, and that's in that smart contract. So if you buy that NFT, you buy an NFT of a digital artwork, and then you sell it again, already in that smart contract, if you're going to sell it, the original seller is going to get a cut of that, maybe 5, 10, 15%. But that's one of the benefits of these. It actually protects artists in a way. Again, my seller ranking is 5 stars. I'm very honored by that, but I didn't deserve that. I haven't sold anything. And then, you have an item description. So, and Alana, if you want to go down further to where we get in the metadata, because this is, you saw that those are the concepts we understand, but this is the stuff behind an NFT. So you have the contract address. This is the address you see in the top left. That's the address in the blockchain. Then you have the token ID. That's the unique token identifier. You saw part of that number up top, but this is the actual complete number down below. And this is what they call metadata. It's basically the behind the scenes data that helps to identify this specific piece. If you look over on the right, it tells you where the image is stored. CloudFront is ultimately where the image is stored, and where you're going to access the logo image if you were to buy this NFT. And you'll notice, and we'll get into the Q&A, what the difference is between an NFT and the underlying art or underlying work, because they're not technically the same thing by any stretch. And then all this stuff is based here. This is all code. These are not things you'd have to understand to sell an NFT. But if you were to try to perhaps authenticate an NFT you wanted to buy, these are things you're going to have to look through and make sure the sellers who they say they are, the creators who they say they are, and confirm that the data showing on whatever platform you're buying on is also matching what the metadata shows, because I'm sure there could be some gaps between the two.
And I think that actually, just to jump in, I think that brings up kind of an interesting question that I had is, let's say we weren't using my firm's logo, but rather just kind of a JPEG of a work of art that I have in my collection. How am I allowed to do that? And how am I proving ownership of that JPEG that I'm then trying to turn around and sell as an NFT?
Yeah, that's a really good and important question. The answer is a lot of it works just like physical art. There's a lot of trust involved, whether it's warranted or not in some cases. We rely so much on trust here. Um, in theory, these websites, these platforms that are being used to buy and sell and create NFTs should be policing what's on there from an intellectual property perspective. So I was on a call with a lawyer last week, and she's heavily involved in intellectual property and art law. So she was talking to Nifty Gateway after our call, after actually a panel we were both on, to discuss some things. Nifty Gateway is one of these big curated platforms. And because they're curated especially, they have to be very much on top of policing what is allowed to be sold on there. Are people violating copyright? We can get into later some of the actual recent scenarios. There's a Basquiat involved scenario with that. So yeah, Alana, the answer is basically a lot of it's trust related. The buyer's working out the assumption that you have the ability that you own the piece, that you have the commercial rights and ability to sell the piece or to sell a copy of it. But it's easy to prove ownership of the NFT. It's easy to show that you created it. It's not as easy on its face to show that you own the work that's being sold on there. And that's something that is going to have to get ironed out on these platforms for this to be a trusted way of selling digital art, for sure.
Which I think is extremely difficult and kind of a little scary when you have clients who are spending $1 million plus on a work of art. That I think there's a lot of components here that, from a legal standpoint, from just an understanding the asset standpoint, what is it that we're buying? And you mentioned Nifty Gateway, and I believe that's the platform that Sotheby's did their recent NFT sale through. What are some of the other platforms and the fees associated with selling through these platforms or transacting through these platforms? I know you also mentioned gas too is another fee kind of in this transaction process that buyers are paying.
Yeah, so the platforms just keep popping up. Another big one is Rarible. Something funny on Rarible that people have been doing is I've seen it, they take an Instagram meme account and they basically create a coin or an Ethereum backed digital entity of these meme generator accounts, and like people technically invest in it. I don't even understand the heads and tails of that. It's funny, but I don't understand people actually putting money behind those things. But Rarible is a big one for sure. Mintable is what we use to create our NFT for this talk. I just keep seeing names pop up and up. I don't know which ones are legitimate. And that's why when I was creating one, I had to really do some research, because just because they're involved in a big sale doesn't mean that there aren't bad actors on there, or that maybe it doesn't mean they're not backed by bad actors. So it's something, if you're going to buy this stuff, do some research, because new names pop up, sales are being made, investments are being made. It's not always clear exactly which are legitimate, but once you find one that's legitimate, as far as the costs go, it really depends and which one you'd want to use. If you're a creator, you have to factor in, are you just going to sell one piece? Like this I created for free, and we would sell this if we were to sell it, and the gas fee that we discussed would be paid by the buyer. If I were a gallery and I wanted to sell NFT works by all of the artists that I represent, I could create an entire store on here, and I could pay the quote unquote gas fees up front. So the cost of doing business over time just gets evened out, and it makes sense. But if you're doing one-offs, this is a great platform because you don't really have to worry about paying the gas fees. The buyer pays that. They kind of understand that cost is being transferred to them. But yeah, it really depends what people are trying to do. Some of them, I'm sure, have paid subscriptions, similar to how Mintable, you could create a store on there. But they're definitely, everyone's looking now for a competitive advantage based on what type of content you can sell, how the gas fees are going to work, or be paid up front or on a piece by piece basis. So yeah, so there are definitely associated costs, but in general, to get started, the cost, other than the time taken, is essentially zero.
Okay. So let's make another note before we go on to kind of our main Q&A here is, let's see if I refresh the page.
Yeah.
here if we have any change in the value since we started talking about this.
My guess is we do. Let's
Oh,
see.
yep. So we've already gone up. So my company's logo is already worth an additional $3 if you buy it now. So
Buy it
let's
before it keeps going up, people.
exactly. So let's see at the end of this talk, we'll come back to this to see how this has changed. And I think the reason that we've kind of, we're focusing on this change in price is it, and something that we'll get into a little later is what is the value of an NFT and how do you value it? And you're looking both at the underlying kind of asset or the image itself, but then also the volatility of cryptocurrency. So you have these two factors at play here.
Yep.
So I'm going to stop my screen share. And so we'll kind of continue on. And I think something that you touched upon that I wanted to dig a little deeper on is kind of the about what an NFT is as it relates to art, but then also the difference between digital art and an NFT. But then let's add one extra component that you alluded to is where I've also seen kind of physical art that has a digital token registered on the blockchain to help track authenticity and provenance, and kind of how are these are all grouped kind of within the same idea of an NFT blockchain. What are these different pieces here and how are they interacting or how are they different?
Absolutely. And right before I answer that, so Bjorn Mittling put a question to us that I want to answer now before the end. So Bjorn asked, why would the price go up if no one was bidding on it? So when I said there's a supply and demand aspect of this, Bjorn, it's not related to bids or the price. That change in value is that gas fee we're talking about. So the supply and demand is happening elsewhere in the Ethereum blockchain world where miners and content platforms are essentially more or less automatically negotiating the price of these gas fees that are being transferred to the buyers. So think of it, it's almost as if you were, it's almost as if you were trying to drive into New York City and you get to the Holland Tunnel and they change the price of the toll automatically based on how many people want to go in. Now that would be a crazy concept for us and it would be extremely volatile. That's kind of what's going on here, which is that there's tremendous volatility because the background is changing. So hopefully that helped, Bjorn. Looks like that made some sense. So now to answer your next questions, Lana. So yeah, it's really important to understand NFTs on their face are not art. I mean, you could say they're conceptual art, but as we understand it, they're not art. They don't have any tie-in to art, but digital artists and digital art collectors realize that they're a great way to transmit ownership and likely bypass galleries, likely bypass auction houses. Not everyone, especially the biggest ones, are bypassing auction houses, but in theory, it does give you the ability to bypass those entities. So an NFT is really just an online token that is unique and can be used to define ownership of digital content. Again, could be a work of art, could be a JPEG file, could be anything. And so they kind of get, it's convoluted when you see headlines like NFT purchased for X amount. So yeah, someone bought Beeple's Everydays, which we'll be talking about throughout this because it was such a huge scenario and continues to be a headline. So they bought an NFT of it, but really they were buying the art behind the scenes. That's the idea. So the NFT is the gateway to purchasing that work or those works that you're purchasing. Go for it, Alana.
And I think the question, and we'll get into it a little later, but the question is why pay $69 million for something that anyone can see online, that we all have seen online and anyone can download it? It's this really, I think it presses the question of what is art and how is this kind of new, like this combination with the concept of NFT and it essentially a JPEG. Mm-hmm. And what am I owning here if I can't hang it on my wall?
Yeah, and I think for most traditional collectors and art fans, and I'm generally a traditionalist when it comes to art, not that I don't like modern artists, but as far as the format of art, that is a big question because yeah, you can take a picture of the Salvator Mundi, but seeing it on Mohammed bin Salman's mega yacht is quite a different experience. Not that I've seen it, I can only imagine. But it's a very different thing. But if he purchased Beeple's work, you would have essentially the same access to that work that the owner does. So I think that is a big question. And I think that is not just I know from talking to collectors, that's what makes certain people leery about investing in these. But getting returning to your original question of getting into that physical art and how do NFTs tie in. So this, I think, is one of the great utilities potentially of NFTs and blockchain technology, and companies are popping up to offer things like this, where you can take physical art. I could be a painter, I could be a gallerist, I could be a collector, and I can have images of the art, perhaps of the title, bills of sale, et cetera, and I can upload that to a blockchain, tie it to an NFT, and then if someone perhaps steals that art in the future, God forbid, I would still own the NFT and say, it's known that unless you have this, you are not the legal owner. So if anyone tries to buy this, you're buying stolen art. So it's a way of securing art. It's a way of having an online registry of art. And I think it can help because art is so unregulated, and there's great aspects to that, but there's also the aspect of if you're self-regulated, you really need to self-police bad behavior. And I think that, basically creating a digital token or digital backing of a physical piece can really go towards helping to secure physical art.
No, I think that's a really good kind of, it adds that, it helps legitimize kind of the whole idea and just adds levels of security to the largely seemingly unregulated art market. But I think with kind of the levels of different additional levels of provenance check, authenticity, security, we're also kind of, I think there's the other side where there are a lot of criticisms about NFTs. We're really in a market frenzy right now where I think, unfortunately, when that happens, vetting can really fall by the wayside, where there's kind of underinformed buyers flood into the market, where it really is a largely unregulated space. You have new rules of the marketplace aren't clear. It's a self-regulated industry where I think we don't have these industry-wide standards, best practices, where I think you do have some of that in the traditional art market, but then also in the traditional art market, we still do have fraudsters who sell $1 million, who sell the Jackson Pollock painting through eBay. We know that the Knoedler forgery scandal proved that even knowledgeable collectors can be susceptible to fraud and fake paintings. So with all of these issues, can you talk a little bit about some of these criticisms of NFTs, of this new kind of marketplace way of transacting? I know copyright is an issue that I've read a lot about. Sleep minting, which I think I understand a little bit, but I know that you can give some insight there. And also kind of the concern of a lot of these pages where the NFTs are being sold, they're startups. What happens if that company no longer exists, that website no longer exists? What protections do I have there as a collector?
Yeah, so I'll answer the last one first because that's probably the easiest one to answer, the most secure answer. So let's say you buy something through Mintable. Now, remember when we showed you the screen, we had that ID, we had the token number and everything. That is a token that pertains to the Ethereum blockchain. This just happens to be one platform through which you're able to access it. So it'd be like, think if you're storing stuff. I don't know if you've seen the movie Ice Age. There's a squirrel constantly who's trying to store nuts in ice because it's the Ice Age. He's trying to store nuts in a glacier, and he constantly fails and creates avalanches and stuff. But think of if you just have, it's kind of what a blockchain is. It's like this big block of ice. It's this entity that's staying there that people can access. So I can drill in and store something on one side. You can drill in and store something elsewhere. They call them nodes on the blockchain, essentially. And basically, it gives people the ability from all different areas to access this one singular piece. And blockchains expand, people mint new coins and so forth. But as far as these access points, don't think of the platform necessarily as the creator or owner of the blockchain. They're merely an intermediary through which you can access the blockchain. So I just like to give the glacier example because it gives you a physical idea of like, okay, you can access it from many points, but it's still this one entity. No one actually owns that specific entity. It's just being utilized for things. Now, to get into the next question, or the original question, to discuss the critiques, I think most of the critiques of blockchain, of cryptocurrencies, of NFTs are totally legitimate. I think if you're saying it's totally seems to be unregulated and there's sketchy behavior going on, I'm all on board with that. There's a lot of concern there. Yeah, you may be able to maintain something on a blockchain, but what if the blockchain disappears someday? All this stuff's tied to the internet. It's not like there's real, physical area this is being stored in. I mean, there's servers somewhere, but it's not the same as like there's no bank vault in which you're storing these pieces you buy. So that is, probably a long-term question of how can this be secured, and how legitimate is this, and that's always the concern when you're buying something digital. But I think it's more secure than probably on its face, it seems. And now if you get into, anyone could forge, not anyone, but there are great artists who can forge great works. And the Knoedler Gallery scandal is probably the best recent example of that, but it happens all the time. There's talented artists, they forge and they sell the forged works. And usually people don't know it's forged, or sometimes they do possibly. And there's a great Netflix documentary about the Knoedler Gallery you should all watch, I think. But that adds questions like, hey, this is digital art. I can screenshot this, upload it somewhere, and it's basically going to look like the original. So it actually makes it really easy, in theory, to claim you own a piece or try and sell a piece. Now, one of the secure aspects of that, that's become less secure with sleep minting is, usually these pieces are being sold directly by the artist, directly by gallery, directly by an auction house, or with the authority of one of those groups. So that kind of adds, that kind of takes away concern of who created it. But you mentioned the concept of sleep minting. So sleep minting, without getting too far into the weeds, is basically the idea that normally, like when we created the logo NFT, we created it in agreement. I put it up, you sent the piece to me. But what if we took the work of a famous artist, and someone did this to Beeple with his everyday's work that sold for about 70 million, and they were able to do what's called sleep minting. So basically the idea is there are workarounds where you can create an NFT, automatically transfer ownership to someone else, and then sell it through them to someone. And someone was doing that with Beeple's account. So the reason it's not a massive concern is you're not actually hacking their account. It's basically just a workaround that shouldn't be allowed and shouldn't be doable, but people figured out is doable. That's kind of what happens a lot on the internet. So it's less concerning than it sounds. But let's say you went to buy that work, it's going to say it's from Beeple. If you don't do some background research to find out the original creator, and there's a group called Etherscan, whose software you can use to actually figure that out, you might buy that work, and then by the time you buy it, you realize, oh man, someone sleep minted this, quote unquote, put it on his account. It wasn't really him who was selling his work again. I got hoodwinked. And so there are definitely concerns with that. Again, if anyone who's listening, if you are going to talk with a client about buying works, I would recommend looking into Etherscan, making sure it's a legit platform you or they are buying on, because you don't want to have these scenarios. And just like with the Knoedler Gallery scenario, and there's a lot of cyber fraud with art going on in the last few years, and it's probably only going to get worse. There's nothing more embarrassing than getting tricked about something that requires a lot of sophistication. You think people who want to buy art want to at least give off the appearance that they know art extremely well, and they're very sophisticated. And so they often don't want to be impolite and ask questions to confirm the veracity of pieces. And, Malcolm Gladwell's written a lot about people naturally being trusting. And I think that's just probably the underlying issue. But it's also the whole sophisticated thing. You don't want to call someone a liar. Somebody who's wearing an ascot and dressed perfectly in an art gallery, how dare you insult them by asking them if the works they're selling are legitimate. So, and I guess part of the thing that would benefit an NFT is that there's no shame in doing background research to find out if it's legit. No one's even going to know you did it. So there's probably, it may allow for more trust in that environment. But look, anyone could put a comment in here about their concerns or thoughts or critiques of NFTs and cryptos, and I will probably agree with most, if not all of them, because most of them are legitimate. It's so new, so unregulated that it's hard to know which way is up sometimes.
No, and I think the rules of the game are changing every single day.
Mhm.
And I know something that we had spoken about was the Basquiat sale, as it relates to issues of copyright, where it was put out, the sale of an NFT of a Basquiat work, that the purchaser would then be able to destroy the original.
Yep.
And kind of think that's an interesting interplay between what is an NFT art and the physical object. But I think really the big issue here is copyright and what passes when you purchase an NFT.
Yeah, and the copyright scenario is interesting because for Basquiat, it can be easy because there's an active estate that's protecting his work. Just like with Picasso, the Picasso family is still active in his estate, from my understanding. When it comes to things like the Salvator Mundi, there's no, Leonardo's family is no longer around. It's public domain. So people can and have created NFTs based on the Salvator Mundi. They'll do it with the Mona Lisa, they'll do it with everything else he made. So you can create an NFT, you can try and sell it. It's easier when you have an existing living entity that's willing to go to bat and protect the legitimacy of the works, and the whole, buying a digital piece, destroying the physical. A lot of this, it's worth discussing now, it begins to involve what's really going on behind the scenes. Why are people throwing massive money at Beeple's work? He's a legit artist. It's not like he's a nobody. He's worked with big celebrities and on set designs for concerts and stuff. So he's a legit guy, but buying his 5,000 of his works for $69 million with a cryptocurrency and a shock auction where the values shoot up at the end of the auction, that raises some eyebrows, and for good reason. The guys who were purchasing it, Meta Coven is the name of, or at least the pseudonym of one of the main guys, but there's a group, MetaPurse, that's based in Singapore. It's Southeast Asian guys who created it, and they are investing in, they're basically created a coin, their own cryptocurrency, or at least their own token, to invest in digital art, so to buy NFTs. And so they had created that before purchasing Beeple's Everydays, and Beeple actually has a 2% stake in this group. And now they said that's just, because we believe in paying the artist, and maybe that's why. But they have a massive vested interest in the value of Ethereum going up, in the value of their investment fund going up. And that adds questions like, were they just trying to pay as much as possible to create headlines, or did they actually think it was worth this? Because all of a sudden after they bought it, they said it's worth $1 billion. It's like, well, where are you getting these numbers from? Alana's not there appraising this. These are just people throwing numbers into the air and, hoping they'll stick. But if you look, not long before the call, there was a headline that Alana sent me where these guys have their group MetaPurse, this investment fund, and the value of their token has gone down tremendously since the sale. And the value of a lot of NFTs in general have gone down after earlier in the year. There were a month or two where just shocking numbers were being thrown around to purchase NFTs of art, of trading cards, of digital trading cards, which, these are cool concepts, but, the numbers behind the scenes are certainly suspicious. The people involved in this have almost undeniably, at least some of them have ulterior motives. And there's some good investigative work being done, but look, I'm extremely suspicious of where these numbers are coming from.
So now so are you telling me that my company logo by the end of this call is not going to be worth $69 million?
Unfortunately, I guess it probably won't. Well, we have a couple dozen audience attendees. If they all start bidding and fighting, we may reach somewhere close to that. But yes.
Great. So I think actually this is a good segue. I think for those of you who showed up at today's talk because you heard about the $69 million Beeple sale and you were trying to figure out what is an NFT and what's going on in the art market, I do want to bring up an image here so we can talk a little more about the work itself and kind of some of the other works of art that we're seeing trading on the market. So let me do a screen share here. And actually, I'm going to do my desktop.
And while Alana's getting that up, I can tell you guys that if you go on Nifty Gateway, you will see works being sold in the trillions of dollars. Not being sold, being offered, I should say. So, they're, I don't think anything aside from Saudi Aramco or Amazon is worth $1 trillion. So, some of these numbers are offensively high and will make people not trust even the utility of these things, unfortunately.
But it is worth what someone's willing to pay. So if someone
true.
is willing to pay that much money, is it not worth that? But
That is
we'll
true.
get into that in a little bit. So, so up here on the screen, we do have Beeple's every day, the first 5,000 days. This is now the third highest price achieved by a living artist, which is just kind of unbelievable that this artist, who, as you mentioned before, is kind of a legitimate artist, but is also kind of a relative newcomer to the art market, and really only first heard about NFTs, from what I read, about 6 months ago, and now is one of the most high profile artists that's really kind of that's defining this market boom and has made an extraordinary amount of money off of the rise of prices of NFTs. And it's wild because NFTs and the transaction of NFTs have made the leap from being sold by specialist websites, some that we've already spoken about, Nifty Gateway, Super Rare, Maker's Place, OpenSea, to premier auction houses, Sotheby's, Christie's, Phillips. And so what is this work of art? What is Everyday? So it's a digital collage of all of the images that Beeple has posted online since 2007. And this image itself was made or minted this past February as a non-fungible token. And the purchaser of this image essentially owns a long series of numbers and letters that resides in a digital wallet. It's a giant JPEG that represents the spirit of the artwork itself. So, and what's also interesting to talk about, kind of the more traditional auction house platform, is this work was the first purely digital NFT sold by Christie's, and Christie's actually accepted payment in Ethereum. And it's the first time that a traditional auction house has accepted to engage in this fully dematerialized exchange authenticated on a blockchain. Yep. And as you kind of alluded to earlier, so within seconds remaining in the sale, the work was set to sell for less than $30 million, but a last minute kind of flurry of activity prompted a 2-minute extension of the sale, and the final sale price was over $60 million. You had 33 active bidders who were engaging in this sale, which is just completely unbelievable.
Yeah, and it's worth noting, Alana, that Christie's had been looking into NFTs since at least 2018, I believe. Mm-hmm. So they were very much ahead of the curve on this, and they hosted an event, I think, in 2018. And they gave away a free NFT to anyone who attended it. Most people threw it out or didn't even, they probably gave out a paper copy of how to download it. And people just threw it out and had no interest. And then less than 3 years later, boom, you've got one of the biggest art sales in history via an NFT. So it's pretty fascinating.
And I think what I've read is some of those NFTs have been selling for in excess of $10,000. So something you received for free a couple of years ago, if you had only held on to it. But I think that's also the problem, is once you kind of throw that token away and that kind of that information on the token, there's no way for you to say, well, that's actually mine.
And the funny thing
which is an interesting kind of idea, which we've heard kind of early on with the rise of the price of Bitcoin. If you don't have the information to access your Bitcoin, you can't prove that you actually own it.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing. So it doesn't mean it disappears. It's just the means to access it have disappeared. So there was this poor guy. I shouldn't say poor, because apparently he's made a ton of money on cryptocurrencies, but he had something like $200+ million worth of Bitcoin in a crypto locker somewhere, but he forgot his passcode, and he was trying a few of them, and I don't think he succeeded. And thankfully for him, he'd made money, but I mean, losing $200 million, I would freak out if I lost $200. And this guy's just hoping the password he guesses is right. And yeah, it doesn't mean those Bitcoin disappear. It just means he will never get to them again. And there's no workaround.
Which is why absolutely wild to think about. So I think, and you've touched upon this a little bit earlier, but kind of talking about this new collector base, kind of the difference of the works are being sold at Christie's, but Is it traditional art collectors who are purchasing this? Who's purchasing these NFTs? And what we're seeing is this boom is largely driven by speculators who have made digital fortunes from cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin and Ethereum. And what's missing from a lot of these NFT transactions are the blue chip collectors who typically drive the sales of the art market. We're seeing this growing wedge between the new generation of digital speculators and the old school art collectors. The concerns of a lot of these traditional art collectors about this new area of issues of quality, ownership, authenticity, they're really looking for, I think, also clarity around what are they purchasing. You have a lot of collectors who have been following the ups and downs of the contemporary art market as speculators have even been holding back on this new kind of NFT market and boom. So it's kind of this interesting split of a whole new area of collectors who have previously probably have never purchased art before, spending millions of dollars on digital art and so that or so on an NFT. But then that begs the question, is it actually art? So buying an NFT is not really about buying a physical object, but it's about buying the concept of owning something. It's you own the work of art, but you actually don't possess it. So somebody spent $69 million on a JPEG that anyone can download from the internet. And up here we have on the screen, it's a New York Times column that was turned into an NFT that sold for more than $500,000. I mean, it's wild. And I mean, more than $500,000, it's over $1 million. And so it's playing with this idea of originality. But then we also have kind of the idea of the Mona Lisa. There's only one, but then you also have the image of Mona Lisa on mugs, umbrellas, posters all around the world. So it's kind of an interesting idea of the image itself, the original image, but then also kind of everyone can own an image of the Mona Lisa. And let's kind of take it a step farther, that's something that the idea of kind of art, and then let's take the example of some of you may have read a couple of years ago at Miami Art Basel, you had Maurizio Catalan's comedian, which was essentially a banana duct taped to a wall. And what was purchased was kind of the contract or the description of the work of art itself. It didn't have anything to do with the banana or the piece of duct tape, but you're buying the concept of a work of art. So then you also have you have Beeples where anyone can have that image, just like anyone can duct tape a banana to a wall, but then you don't own it. So if I have that banana duct tape to the wall, I don't own that idea, just like anyone who downloads Beeple's Everydays does not own that image. So we're really NFTs are really the new horizon of the fine art sector. And it's a technology that's used to authenticate works of art, but then it's also really up to the viewer, the purchaser, of whether it's art or not. So that's the
and Alana, if I can add one thing with sort of the precedent for these types of concept artworks, even before NFTs and digital art came around. If you look at a Damien Hirst, he created, I think the Shark and Formaldehyde, I think it's called, The Physical Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living. That work, someone said to him, "How is this art?" Or anyone could create that, and he said, "But you didn't, did you?" And that actually, in its essence, is the idea of concept art, which is, what is the value in concept art? It's in creating the concept. It's not that you created a great painting or a great work necessarily, maybe you did, but it's in that novelty. It's in that taking it a step beyond the physical even, or adding a step beyond the physical of why it was created. Like that banana duct tape to a wall. You or I could do that right now. We could have done that very easily, but no one had done that before. And some of it's because it's so silly or so bizarre that adds value to it. And oftentimes it's in the mind of the consumer is this art. So I'm never a believer in, myself, especially because I have an insurance company. I don't it's not up to me to tell someone I like their collection or I
Mhm.
agree with how they're collecting. It's totally up to them, and that's an extension of their person in a sense. It's up to me to protect it. So it's easy for me to say anything is art, but yeah, if you're an art purist and you see a banana duct tape to wall being sold, having a contract sold behind it, or an NFT of something being sold, yeah, you're within your rights to say that's not art, and that's part of the fun of the art world.
Exactly. So speaking of kind of the art world, it's this, what I wanted to show up here on the screen is kind of an understanding. We're talking about a $69 million JPEG, but how is that comparing to kind of the more traditional artwork? So 2019, you had $64 billion worth of art worldwide sold. By 2020, COVID related, that size had kind of dropped down to roughly $50 billion. But now we're looking at up here on the screen, we have the image, we have a graph of crypto art data. Kind of, you can see the recent kind of trajectory here and the boom in the recent months. And I think in large part, it's really being driven by a huge increase in the value of cryptocurrency as well. So we have, and just kind of the jump, for example, one of the platforms, OpenSea, which is a leading NFT marketplace, had monthly sales roughly a year ago of only $1.5 million. That jumped to 8 million in January and 86 million in February. So you're seeing this huge increase, but when you look at the overall kind of art market, quote unquote, this is still relatively a small portion of sales for art.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll see, because you see the boom here and you see the bust, because look at where it was in March or so, and look at where it is now in the last month. And that's what happens. So you could say it's a bubble, and I'm sure it is, because unknown artists who will never be bought again are being sold for crazy. Not talking about people, but in general, crazy stuff's being thrown around to buy these pieces. But that's how most bubbles go. There's a lot of blown up value, fake value. Look at the tulip bubble in Holland, and I think it was the 1400s. If you look at that, yeah, so people are buying homes, trading for a home for a tulip bulb, and it's absolute nonsense. But if you look at the Netherlands now, they're still pretty large producers of tulips. So, there is some value there. We don't know what it ultimately will be. We don't know what segment of the art will become digital, not just sold digital, but be digital art. But clearly there's a demand out there for digital art and collectibles, and we'll see what percentage that takes up in the next decade or two.
And then I think the question is, well, how are we valuing it? What is the value of this digital art? And before we answer that question, I did just want to kind of share with you some additional works of art or NFTs that have sold recently. We have the Pixel, which sold for 1.35 million this past April at Sotheby's. It is a single gray pixel, period. And I'm sorry. So that's what, and for $1.3 million. So again, that's the concept of value here for me. It's just kind of, it's mind boggling. You have the crypto kitties, which have been around since the mid 2010s. That sold February 2021 for over $500,000. And then also kind of an interesting kind of note, back in 2018, you had this image Forever Rose sell for $1 million. So NFTs aren't new. They haven't been created in the past couple of months. They have been around, but we're really looking at this recent boom in value. And I did want to kind of quickly talk about value as it relates. So I think this is a really interesting example for CryptoPunks. The sale is actually opening at Christie's today. We have 9 CryptoPunks that are with an estimate of $7 to $9 million, and kind of the idea of can we determine the values of NFTs? Yeah. It's art is what somebody's willing to pay on a given day, whether it's an analog or digital market. Markets are irrational, unpredictable. You have booms and busts in the art market, and we've already seen that NFTs have experienced a lot of volatility as it relates to cryptocurrencies, but we don't have this long-term track record, and it does make that as a result difficult for them to appraise. It's way too early to know if NFTs are going to hold long-term value. But then also, let's go back to impressionist art, cubist art, abstract expressionist art. All of those are avant-garde works of art that at its time weren't that valuable. I mean, Andy Warhol's Campbell soup cans, his first show, he didn't sell any works of art. Those are now worth millions of dollars. So I think we're still too early into this market to see what the status of these works of art are going to be a couple of years out or a couple of decades out. But I do want to kind of talk a little bit about these crypto punks, which it starts to play into a little bit of how would you appraise something like this? So the CryptoPunks, there are about 10,000 CryptoPunks out there, all of which were procedurally generated and claimed for free back in 2017 when the project was launched. And now you have the cheapest CryptoPunks today are around $30,000 in Ethereum currency. And then some of the rarest ones are up to $10 million. And you have the question is why are some of these punks worth tens of thousands of dollars? Why are other ones worth millions? And it's driven by rarity of different attributes. So you have an earring on one punk is a common attribute, and that commands lower prices. But then you have beanie hats, which are really desirable, and that's one of the rarest attributes. And so there's a premium paid for that. So these are some of the aspects that when you appraise more of a physical work of art, you're looking at that. What are collectors looking for? What's most desirable? What's not? What's a value add? Where is the premium paid? So there are a lot of similarities, but I think that there is this aspect of the volatility of the cryptocurrency that is another added component here. And before we go over to the Q&A, and I know we've kind of gone over a little bit, and hopefully some people will be able to join us past 1 p.m. for some Q&A, but I did want Hayden just to quickly talk about insurance of these these digital assets, which I think is a huge unknown at this moment for a lot of collectors.
Yeah, and this is an interesting one because I've been insuring for years physical art up to God knows how high of agreed values on certain well-known works. But NFTs introduce something interesting where you have a lot of the traditional concerns with art: damage during transport, damage from a fire, smoke, water, etc., being hit, poorly restored. Those concerns are essentially non-existent for digital art. So in some senses, it's much easier to insure as long as you have a carrier who's willing to insure it. That's why my job as a broker is to sell the concept of that to some carriers. But you also have, it's not often that you lose a painting. You're not bringing it out like you'd lose a watch. Some of these NFTs are being lost, or like we talked about earlier, you don't have the copyright to sell a piece. Someone buys it, they have the NFT, but they can't access what's under it. In theory, that's a disappearance in a sense. If you can't eventually access it, that could be an insurance claim, depending on how it goes down. So it's going to be very interesting. Most of the insurance contracts that exist can very well insure digital art and have been used, and I have insured digital art in the past. But with NFTs, with the blockchain, we run into scenarios where things, yes, are more secure, but also lead to new risks arising. And I think you'll see insurance carriers over the next 5 to 10 years get more comfortable with these as the market cools down a bit. A lot of the worry right now would be on how do you value these? How many appraisers are out there who can legitimately say, I know exactly how to value these? They'd be lying to you if you said that. You're an appraiser, and clearly there's ways to appraise these. And then there's the aspect of like, well, there's a cryptocurrency behind them, and that value could impact the value of the pieces. So there are nuances that the traditional art market just has never had to consider. And then there's also, but a lot of it is the same. Provenance and so forth remain the same, and that's still something that you can use to value it. But yeah, I think right now I absolutely believe digital art is insurable. I started helping clients who are prospects who are looking to insure their collections. you just document the collection just like you would anywhere else. You got to know where you're accessing it from and so forth. And you have to at least know what you purchased it for, what the current value is. And there might be some room for negotiation on how much a carrier is willing to insure it for, or if they're willing to insure it with market appreciation coverage factored in as they would oftentimes with a physical piece. So there's a diminution of value. Some coverages just aren't really needed so much because pieces aren't being repaired after damage. So yeah, they're absolutely insurable. They're worthy of being insured. Digital art is art, in my opinion, despite all the confusion with certain aspects of NFTs, but it's absolutely art. And yeah, so it's funny because it removes a lot of the concerns, then adds totally new ones that will iron out as an industry over the next few years.
So speaking of appreciation and value, and we have to go back and check to see, let's go back and see what the new value is of our NFT before we go to the Q&A. So let's see.
Let's see if everyone bid on it. We might be well into the millions by the time we get back over there.
Do a screen share here. And refresh the page.
Moment of truth.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's
it went down. How insulting.
I know. Apparently, it's not. I don't think it's going to hit the $69 million that I was hoping.
But don't forget, there's people took until the last 2 minutes to get there, so there's still hope. We might well get.
True. Fingers crossed. But now let's go to. We do have a couple questions here, so I'm going to stop the screen share and open up to the Q&A. And I think a great question to start off with is, why should artists create NFTs? And I think something that we had spoken about yesterday was Murakami was an artist who had explored the option. I know Damien Hirst is, but they have held back because I think there's the issue of long-term value. But then also a lot of emerging artists are kind of jumping on the bandwagon. And have heard that they are making a certain amount of money from selling NFTs.
Absolutely. Yeah. There are definitely legit artists looking into doing this. Some who have done it already, some who I'm sure will do it in the near future. As far as why should they create them? Well, if you're talking about creating an NFT as if that's only going to be the art, well, if you're a physical artist, that might, it may devalue your physical work. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe it will. But if you as an artist are creating an NFT to essentially track your physical work or your digital work and better secure it, well, that's a great reason to create one. So I think you can actually better secure your work or have your gallery do that, who is selling your work. So there are definitely reasons to do it. And then, there are probably some artists who do so well with their physical art that it might be good for a headline or two, and then would possibly devalue their work in the future.
And I think also the smart contracts that you spoke about, because there's also in the art market, have always been questions about artist royalties and how to track and make the payouts. This is a way for artists to build that in. So as the value of their works go up, they're able to take advantage of that appreciation.
Exactly. And just like my National Geographic example at the start, if you're a photographer, if you're an artist and you have that smart contract, you're going to be, if you include that, you can maintain copyright or you can transfer it, and you can take money, a percentage of secondary market sales. So those are other financial reasons why you'd want to create one potentially.
So another question we have here is, if Christie's accepted the payment in Ethereum, will they be able to convert it back to USD, or will they be investing back into the ecosystem? What happens if the value of the currency goes down?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's gone in both ways, because initially they were going to do just the sale through Ethereum, but they were going to take their fee via US dollars. And then I think close to last minute that was changed, and they were agreeing to do Ethereum. I don't know what they're going to do for sure with it. It's been such a great headline for them. I think it would, and look, like Alana said, the evening auctions are about to happen, and they've got more NFT work. So maybe they are investing it back into the ecosystem, so to speak, but I'm not sure to what extent. And yes, you could take, if you have Ethereum, you could cash out in US dollars and so forth, and or you can buy something else with it. So there are a lot of opportunities. You see companies, I know Tesla has talked about investing in some of their cash reserves in cryptocurrencies. Other firms have discussed doing that, at least a percentage of their reserves. So yeah, totally possible that they do a little bit of both, where yeah, you reinvest it or you try and cash out.
And I think that's exactly what people did as the seller of the work. What
Yep.
I read was that shortly after the sale, after he received payment in Ethereum, he did convert a portion of it, if
Yeah.
not all of it, into US dollars. So
Yeah, I think a lot of people will do that. And there's one last question in that, which is what happens if the value of the currency goes down? Well, if you kept it all in Ethereum, you just lost a whole lot of money versus what you could have cashed out at. So that's the cold hard answer is, which is probably why people is very smart. I know there are some people who think the U.S. dollar is obsolete and cryptos are the future, but anything that volatile is probably not something you want to build your future around completely, at least.
yes, it's extremely volatile. So, and one last question that we have here, isn't there an advantage of attaching a virtual and visible but physical tag of some sort to a newly created piece of art as opposed to registering just the digital image of the piece? And I think that's something that, just to answer the first part of it, and then Hayden, as kind of in the insurance space, I don't know how often you see this, but I think there is, and actually it's funny, it's a nice segue into my newsletter for next month. It's something that we're actually talking about is theft of artwork and ways of kind of tracking artwork with different invisible tags as a way to, if the work is stolen, to track it down. But I think there are a lot of issues with that. I have seen companies or ideas pop up time and time again about that concept, but it is something that hasn't seemed to really catch on. Hayden, I don't know your experience in that space.
Yeah, it's definitely yet to catch on, but there are companies. 4Art Technologies is Swiss based, and they basically have created a blockchain so people can register their art, be it a collection, be it something that an artist creates, and they want to register themselves. And you're doing it basically for that virtual tag purpose. So you can register and know who really owns it and make sure that that token is transferred to a future buyer as proof of legitimate ownership. And without that, you could say you're not the legitimate owner. So there's definitely an advantage to doing that, especially if you're, and it takes away the concern if you're an artist worried about devaluing your work. If you're just creating a digital token to track your piece, you're not selling your art digitally. I don't see why that would really devalue your physical work. So I think I can't really think of a disadvantage to doing it personally, as long as you're not trying to keep the art secret. I think it's a good option.
And then we do have one more question here. Do you think it's possible to insure an NFT in the case of the platform hosting it, Nifty, et cetera, is no longer in operation or the server goes down?
Yes. Well, first of all, you definitely can, because in a sense, it's no different than if like a building burns down that you were storing your art in, it disappears. But you're not going to lose that NFT necessarily if Nifty Gateway disappears. The Ethereum blockchain still exists. You would need that to disappear for your work to totally disappear. And now here's another aspect to it. Let's say you buy an NFT and you have that NFT, but you also download the art behind it. You have that copy. Yeah, if the NFT disappears, okay. But if it would be wise for carriers, and this is what I've recommended to insure digital art and look at an NFT more as a way of just backing that art or securing it or securing ownership of that. Instead of title insurance, perhaps you could just have an NFT. Or an NFT backing the title. You can have a copy of the title or the title insurance policy on the NFT that you sell. So there are a lot of options with that. But yeah, I wouldn't worry so much about the platform disappearing. I'd worry more so if the blockchain somehow becomes obsolete down the road or there's no way to access it. That's more of a concern than the platforms changing and or disappearing. Good question.
Great. So that's all of the questions we have. What I'm going to do is, as we wrap up, I am going to pull up our contact information. So if anyone has questions for you Hayden or for myself, after the end of this lecture, feel free to email us directly. We would be more than happy to answer all of your questions. And we hope that you enjoyed today's lecture and found it really informative, and hopefully kind of you come away with a better understanding of what an NFT is as your clients ask you about this kind of new space. Hopefully you're much more informed, and also we're happy to step in and answer additional questions as they come up and as your clients continue to build out their digital art collections. And thanks again for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me on, Alana. Thanks everyone for listening in and watching, and hopefully you feel a little more comfortable with NFTs after this.
Thanks again.